All right, so if you look on the lab schedule on here, you'll see that for this week, the topic of study in lab is the field notebook. And so I have 4 different handouts for you over here. Does everybody have a copy of the handout? Okay. I've also put some other things on Canvas. Let me show you. If you go to modules, so for lab 1, how to write a field journal. This first handout that I have listed on Canvas is the copy that I have stapled. I haven't been able to find a single reference for how to write a field journal that has everything that you need in it. So that's why I have more than one handout. Now there is another document that I've put on Canvas. It's by E. Raymond Hall, which we'll be talking about tomorrow in lecture. He's probably one of the more famous mammalogists of the 20th century. He was the director of the museum at the University of Kansas. And he wrote a little booklet that's titled Collecting and Preparing Study Specimens of Vertebrates. Now, I'm not going to go through how to do that today. I might do that later on in the semester. So a lot of this doesn't apply to field journals, but it does have some examples of pages from a field journal. And most mammalogists are pretty picky about how they want you to do the field journal. Most field biologists use what's called the Grinnell system for field notebook. The Grinnell system was developed by another very famous naturalist and biologist by the name of Joseph Grinnell, who was the first director of the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology at University of California, Berkeley. And he taught this method to a number of his PhD students who went on to become very renowned field biologists themselves. And they taught the Grinnell method to their students. And so this method and format for field journals has been passed on from field biologist to field biologist for many, many decades. And it's kind of a standardized way. It makes it easier for museums to catalog electronic copies of field journals. In fact, the Museum of Vertebrate Natural History has digitized all of the field journals of mammalogists that have collected specimens and deposited those specimens in their museum. And that's a routine procedure. Whenever mammalogists or ornithologists collect specimens and make museum skins and deposit them in a museum, in addition to the specimens, which have a tag on them with information, the biologist also makes a copy of their field journal. And that field journal is deposited in the museum along with their specimens. Because the field journal has a lot more information than you could put on a little tiny tag, specimen tag. There's only so much you can put on there. Typically on the specimen tag, I'll show you an example of what one looks like. Well, here's one right here on the cover of this booklet. Let me turn the lights down here a little bit. So on the tag, you have the name of the person who collected the specimen. Once it's deposited in the museum puts a number. They number all the specimens that are deposited there sequentially. The collector, the person that collected it, also keeps a catalog that goes in your field journal, and the specimens that individual collected are also numbered sequentially. And to be able to tell the numbers of one collector with another, typically on the specimen, the collector will put their initials along with their catalog number that's in their field journal. And then once it's deposited in the museum will add a number to the specimen tag that corresponds to the museum's specimen number. Okay, so it has the name of the collector. In the upper left hand of the tag, it has the sex, whether it's male or female, and they use the male and female symbols for that. And then in the middle of the tag, going across the length of the tag, there's a description of the location where the specimen was collected. That's usually done ideally just in one single line. And then if there's any room, habitat information can be put on it, whether it's short grass prairie or mid-grass prairie or riparian vegetation, just a general description. And then in the journal, you would describe the vegetation in more detail. Now, you don't have to identify every single species of plant that's in the area where you collect specimens, but you should at least have a description of the dominant vegetation. If the dominant vegetation is, let's say, Great Plains cottonwood and green ash and eastern red cedar, you want to put that in your field journal. Plus, there'd be other information in the field journal that's not on the tag. There'd be things like the weather, weather including temperature, wind speed, time of day, topography, whether it's a north-facing slope or a south-facing slope, or whether it's flat. And then in the lower left of the specimen tag, there's some measurements, and we don't need to go into all those now, but we might do that later. And then the lower right hand has the person's name, and then lower right hand corner, you write out the date. So, like for example, today is what, January 13th? So you would write 13 January 2022 in the lower right hand corner. So these tags are pretty small. They're only about a 1/2 inch by 3 inches long. You can't really put a lot of information on there. And so additional information associated with the specimen is deposited in a field journal. Okay? Now, the field journal typically is made up of 3 different parts. The first part is usually called the journal or itinerary. And in the journal or itinerary, well, I think the best way of explaining this is just to show you an example. So on one of these single page handouts that I've given you, there's one, and I'm sorry about the size, this is just how it came out of the printer, so it's going to be kind of hard to read. I'm probably not going to be able to read this because I need reading glasses. But the one at the top of the page says itinerary. In the journal, you typically write out a narrative of where you went, what you did, who you were with, and what you saw. Okay? And so it's kind of like an itinerary. So some biologists call it itinerary, some of them just call it the journal. Okay? So, for all of the pages in your field journal, you want to write your name in the upper left-hand margin, just like you see on this example. So the upper left-hand that page, you'll see it says E.R. Hall. That stands for E. Raymond Hall. He generally abbreviated his first and middle initiative, first and middle name. And then below that is the year. So that says, what does that say? I can't read it. 1945, okay? So yeah, he worked mostly about the middle of the 20th century. And he collected thousands of specimens and put them up as museum skins and deposited them at the museum at the University of Kansas. In fact, he was such a prolific collector, and his students collected so much and made so many museum skins that the University of Kansas Museum of Natural History is one of the three largest, has one of the three largest collections of mammals in the United States. It's a huge collection. So the upper left-hand corner, you put your name, and then below that you put the year. You do that on every single page. And you want to have about a 1-inch margin. I sometimes, if I have a smaller field journal, I'll sometimes go with a slightly narrower margin, but you do want to have, you have to have a left-hand margin. So the itinerary is the first section. I'll come back to that and talk about what you should put in there a little bit later. In the middle of your journal, there's a section called the species accounts. And again, I'll come back to that and explain. And then towards the end, the last third of your journal is an area called the catalog. Catalog is where you record only the specimens that you collect. So that you collect and make into museum skins. If you aren't collecting anything, if you're just doing a recapture study where you're live capturing and marking the animals and releasing them, you don't put those in your catalog. That would go in the journal section. Okay. So let me show you some examples of some different types of journals. Brunel recommended that for a field journal that you use a 3-ring binder with high-quality acid-free paper. And he recommended use paper like this. This is a field journal that I kept when I was in graduate school. And notice the pages aren't 8.5 by 11. They're smaller than that. I think these are like 8.5 by 5.5. That's the recommended size for a field journal. But paper that size is hard to find. I don't know if you're going to be able to find paper like that in Mitchell, South Dakota. You probably have to special order, especially acid-free paper. Because remember that these journals they're supposed to be deposited in a museum with specimens. And if you don't use high-quality paper over the years, the acid and the bleach that they use to make the paper white will cause the paper to deteriorate. And eventually the paper will turn brown, it will just crumble after 100 years or 150 years. So I'm not going to require that you use paper this size in a 3-ring binder. They're almost impossible to find. Another option, though, is that there is a field journal that you can buy. You probably have to order it online. Again, I don't think you're going to be able to find this in Mitchell, South Dakota, or maybe even, probably wouldn't be able to find it in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. There's a company that sells a journal for taking field notes. It's called Write in Rain, and it's high quality waterproof paper. And so you could take that out in the field if it rains. In some parts of the country it rains almost every day. You can't help but be outside when it's raining. It won't allow the ink to run. And you're supposed to use black permanent ink. Okay, that's what you're supposed to use for your field journal. Permanent ink doesn't fade over time. You shouldn't use a blue ballpoint pen because that ink is not permanent. It will fade. It will fade over several decades. Okay. Those Write in Rain notebooks are probably pretty expensive though, and they're also probably hard to obtain. So you can use other types of journals for field notebook. This is actually a laboratory notebook, and I use this for a study that I did in the Black Hills in 2010 and 2011. It was a study of the Bear Lodge meadow jumping mouse. This is about the right size. The only problem is the cover's not waterproof. It's kind of made out of a fiberboard, and if it gets wet, it swells up, and it kind of, well, you can see right here where it's wrinkled, that got wet a little bit. So that's kind of a disadvantage of using a laboratory type notebook. I think I bought this from the DW bookstore. I don't know if they still have them or not, but at one time, this was required for some of the chemistry classes. So, are any of you in here in chemistry class? Like organic chemistry or anything? Okay. Do you have to get a notebook for a laboratory notebook?
We're just using our iPads.
We're just using the iPad, okay. Field biologists have not moved towards using electronic devices in the field. One of the problems is if you're in an isolated area, there may not be cell phone service, so you may not be able to get internet connectivity. And the other problem is if you're out in the field and it's wet, your equipment might get wet and could get ruined. And so they still use the old-fashioned method of writing things down in a field journal. This was a journal that I started using for one project I was doing last year. This is one that they gave to all the faculty and staff at our fall faculty workshop. This one looks like it has a little bit more durable cover, so if you can find something like that, that would work. I've had students that have even used just composition notebooks that are just soft cover composition notebooks. That's okay to use too for this class. You can probably pick those composition notebooks. I've seen them for sale at Walmart for less than $2, so they're not very expensive. The other thing you'll need for your field notebook is you'll need a high quality pen with black ink. And I was gonna bring one and I couldn't find it this morning, but I have one that I bought at a business supply store. You don't wanna use a ballpoint pen because they usually don't have permanent ink. I like to use a pen with black ink that has a 0.5 millimeter tip. Okay, you want one with a very, very fine tip, because if it doesn't have a real fine tip, it's difficult to write all the information on the specimen tags if you collect any specimens. Okay, I'll try to find that pen that I have that I use for my journals. I'll try to find it and bring it tomorrow during lecture to show you. So let's talk about the different sections. Okay. Oh, and by the way, if you are in ornithology, you can use the same field journal if you have that. If you didn't get it back from me, check with me to see if I may still have it. Although I think I cleaned out some of the ones that students never picked up. I was able to get back to them. I think I threw some of them out that I had for several years. So on this stapled handout, this has a pretty good set of instructions. Now, this particular person suggests that in addition to your field journal, you also have a field notebook. So what they're referring to for a field notebook is that you have just like a small spiral bound writing tablet like this. And you use this to take notes when you're out in the field. And then at the end of the day, you transfer those notes into your field journal. All right? Now, I'm not a big fan of that, because like many people, I tend to be a procrastinator. So if I were to take notes in a little field notebook like this, with plans to write it down at the end of the day. By the end of the day, I'll probably forget to do that. And if you forget to do that, after a while, it doesn't get done. So I prefer just to write directly into my field journal when I'm out in the field. That way it's done, it's in there for good, I don't have to worry about it. Okay, so that's what I would recommend. Unless for some reason it's pouring down rain, you don't want your journal to get wet, then you could do that. But most of the time in South Dakota, you know, it doesn't rain every day here, so most of the time you can take your journal out in the field. I have had times where I've had to take my field journal and stick it underneath my coat so it didn't get wet. All right. So I'm not a big fan of doing this, but there may be times when that may be useful. So you can sort of ignore that part in the field notebook. So after that, it says there's a field journal, species account, and catalog. Those are the three sections of your field notebook. So what you want to do when you set up your notebook at first, you want to divide up your notebook into three sections. So we're probably not going to do a lot of collecting in here, so you don't need to set aside very many pages for your catalog. So if you reserve about the last 10 pages of your field notebook for a catalog, so like count back 10 pages from the end, from the last page, and then write catalog on the top of the page. And that will be the start of your catalog. You're probably going to be mostly writing in the journal section, which is the first section. And so since our catalog is going to be fairly short, you could probably reserve the first 2/3 of your field notebook for your journal or itinerary. And then right after that, you have a section between the journal and the catalog that's called species accounts. And so what I would do is I'd go about 2/3 of the way through your field notebook and then write species accounts, and that's where you would begin writing your species accounts. Okay. So, if you look on the back of the first page of this stapled handout, it says down to hints and tips. Okay, it says date every page. So in the left-hand margin, like you see on this page where it says itinerary, the left-hand margin, every day you start writing again in your journal, you want to write the date and the month in the left-hand margin. Okay, to the left of the left-hand margin line. Then you want to write your name and the year in the upper left-hand corner of the margin. And then for every daily entry, you want to start out by writing the locality, which is the location where you made your observations. Now, it used to be when Grinnell was writing in his journals, this was way back in the beginning of the 20th century, in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. The way he would describe the location is he would describe the number of miles, the direction in miles from the nearest major landmark, like the major town. So he'd say like it was 10 miles north and 3 miles west of Mitchell, South Dakota. Mitchell, Davidson County, South Dakota. That's how he would describe the location. With the ease of availability of GPS devices, because you can download GPS apps on just about any cell phone nowadays, you can capture a GPS coordinates of a location very, very easily. In fact, I'd be willing to bet most smartphones probably have a GPS app of some sort built into it. If they don't, you can download a free GPS app. There's lots of them available. And so you could, I would still write a general description of the location, but I would recommend, since we have availability of GPS, go ahead and put down the GPS coordinates. That's a lot more accurate. Now, another way that they used to use, which is again becoming kind of obsolete, is that most counties in the United States are divided up into ranges, townships, sections, and quarter sections. And so that's another way that, when I was in graduate school, that's how you describe the location before GPS was available. It tells you how old I am. You would write down you'd get a topo map, and you'd find the township and the range and the section on the topo map, and then you describe the quarter section, and that's how you describe the locality. GPS, though, is a lot more convenient, it's a lot more accurate, and so it'd be a good idea. Put a general description, of the location. Like if we're going out to Sandy Beach by Lake Mitchell, write Sandy Beach, Lake Mitchell, Davidson County, South Dakota, and then put down the GPS coordinates for the locality. Now notice on this example that I've given you, and this is a good example. I like this example. This is the basic Grinnell system. So notice that at the description of the locality, he's underlined the locality, the location, with kind of a wavy line. So generally the locality is underlined with a wavy line, and scientific name should be underlined with a straight underline. Okay. Now, don't just make a list of species that you captured or species that you've observed. Notice that this is written in full sentences. So the journal should be a narrative, okay? There should be at least some kind of narrative written. Now, if you're doing some systematic trapping on a trapping grid and you have your traps numbered, you should put a diagram of that trapping grid, and you should label the trap locations by number. And then it's okay to make a list of the specimens you captured, but you need to describe that. You need to preface that in writing. You need to say, this is our trapping grid, and it's 100 by 100 meters square, and the traps were laid out every 10 meters apart on the grid, in 10 rows of 10. You need to write that out. Okay, so you want to be as detailed as you can without including any extraneous, irrelevant information. So at the bottom of this second page of this handout, it says basics. It says you should have the time, and by convention they use military time, or 24-hour time. So in the morning, say if you go out at 9 o'clock, it'd be 0900. Or if it's 10 o'clock, it'd be 1000. 1 o'clock would be, you take the 12 hours of the morning and then you add the time in the afternoon. So 1 o'clock would be 1300 hours. 11 p.m. would be 2300 hours. Okay. The date, that should go on the left-hand side, left-hand margin. Date, it says use international format. So you put the date first, and then the month, and then the year. And then locality, that should go at the beginning of every entry for every new locality that you go to. And then the route, describe the route. How did you get there? Did you go up highway, did you go north on Highway 37 north of Mitchell, or what road did you go on? How far did you go? And my preference is that scientists use a metric system. It used to be that they just used miles. They said, well, in the United States we use miles, so we're going to use miles in our journals. But scientists now use the metric system. That's been pretty standardized, SI units. And so I would recommend converting your miles to kilometers, because if you eventually publish information from your journal, you're gonna have to convert it into kilometers anyway, so you might as well do it right from the start. The weather, the temperature, cloud types, wind, whether, how much overcast, is it 50% overcast, 10% overcast, wind speed, rain, etc. Habitat, what kind of habitat is it? Backyard, forest, desert, wetland, etc. Next page, arrival and departure times, list of species seen, vegetation, general notes, animal behavior, sketches, maps, and photos. If you're observing a moose that's eating in a pond, draw a picture of it, or take a picture of it with a digital camera and paste that picture in your notebook. Okay, so that's okay to do too. All right, so that's the journal section. Now, the second section of your, and I'd like you to follow the format of this example that I made for you. This is itinerary. Okay, that's from Hall's booklet on collecting and preparing study skins. Okay. Then the second section is called species accounts. Now, species accounts are used mainly to study the behavior of animals, but it can also provide useful information about habitat, where species are found. So in the species account section, you're going to break it up into sections about individual species. So if you make extended observations, let's say of a white-tailed deer herd, like up on along Shannon Road, there's always white-tailed deer up there. You'd have a section that's titled white-tailed deer. And then you would record all your observations of that species in that section. If you make observations of that species on multiple days, each day you put down the date and you start writing in that same section. So what that does is that puts all the information about individual species into one place. So if you were to eventually write a book about mammals of South Dakota, which somebody needs to do that because this reference that we have available, the only reference that's available is getting pretty dated. You can just go to that section and you've got all the information in one place. You don't have to flip back and forth through your journal. So what you're going to do is out in your field, you're going to write all your observations in your journal. But if you make a lot of observations of one species, then you can transfer that information over to your species account. So you can do that at the end of the day. You don't have to, you probably wouldn't want to do that while you're out in the field. But you're going to write everything in your journal, and then if you're interested in a particular species or the behavior of a particular species, then you would copy that information over to your species account. Okay. And then the catalog. Oh, so here's an example of the species account right here. This species account is for Silvolagus auduboni, which we actually have that species, by the way, in western South Dakota. And so the first entry is what? I can't read this, it's too small. July 12th, is it? I'm just guessing because I can't see that. They have the location, and then they wrote all their observations about that species. And then next day, they put the date, and then they did the same. So that's what you put in your species account. Then on this last page, this example of a catalog page. In your catalog, for each specimen that's collected, that's been killed, so that you can collect it as a specimen, you put put the date, and then just to the right of the margin, you put the name of the species, and then you put certain standard measurements that are made on the specimen. Standard measurements that should be always taken on a specimen are the weight. For small mammals, you would do the weight in grams, and larger mammals, you do it in kilograms. Then the total length, including the tail. And when you measure the total length, you want to measure it from the tip of the nose to the end of the last vertebra. You don't measure if there's a tuft of hair on the end of the tail. You don't include that tuft of hair in your measurement. Okay, so you just measured it to the end of the skin on the end of the tail. So total length, that's the first measurement you take. Then the total length of the tail. And again, you don't measure the tuft on the end of the tail. And then you measure the length of the left hind foot and the length of the left ear. And if you look in that little brochure that I put on Canvas by E. Raymond Hall, it'll show you how to do those measurements. There's a certain way of doing that, especially for the ear, because there's different ways you can measure the ear. So you want to measure it from the lowest part of the notch of the ear up to the very tip of the pinna. In addition, right after the name of the species, you generally put the sex, whether it's male or female. And let's see, what else? And then sometimes some biologists put other reproductive information. A lot of small mammals during the breeding season, the testes will drop down into the scrotum, but then in the non-breeding season, the testes will actually move back up into the abdomen. And you can tell by looking to see if the testes are scrotal, if they're in the scrotum, or whether they're abdominal. And so there's certain reproductive information you can put in your catalog, because that goes on the specimen tag as well. So you want to put all the information that needs to go on the specimen tag in your catalog. If the animal is a female, sometimes you can tell if a female is pregnant. You know, her abdomen will be, bulging out. Sometimes you can even palpate the fetuses inside her abdomen. If an animal is lactating, you can tell by looking at the nipples. If they're lactating, and the nipples are a lot larger. Usually if they're lactating, the nipples are sort of surrounded by an area of bare skin. If they're not lactating, their nipples are a lot smaller and they're not as visible. And so there's lots of, we'll go over this later, but there's lots of reproductive information that you can gather on specimens. And that's useful for describing the natural history of the species. All right, are there any questions? I do plan on going out in the field and doing some trapping of small mammals. And when we do, undoubtedly, we'll probably do some collecting. I'm going to have to find out. In order to do any collecting of any non-game species, you're supposed to have a scientific collecting permit. So I plan on putting in an application for a scientific collecting permit so we can go out in the field and collect some specimens. And then I can show you how to do a steady skin. So there's a lot of strings attached to that too. Another thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to get permission from the DW Animal Care and Use Committee to be able to even to go out in the field and do live trapping. I have to get permission, and I'll probably have to go through some special training because of federal laws. So make sure I know how to handle small mammals. To be honest, my opinion is the federal regulations really were not written for working with wild mammals whatsoever. In fact, they just flat out aren't. The federal regulations involving the use of animals in research was written to regulate biomedical research using laboratory animals. It was not written with field biologists in mind. So the regulations don't say anything about working with animals in the field. However, the law says that we have to follow the same regulations. So if they say that a laboratory biologist that's using laboratory mice in a pharmaceutical study, that if they say that you have to go through this training program that doesn't have anything to do with working with wild animals, that's what I have to do that. And it's totally irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. You have to learn things like how to collect a blood sample for an animal, even if I'm never going to do that. But I still have to go through the training. So that's another reason why we're going to wait till a little bit later in the semester before we do something like that. And then I have to get a permit, have to go through, have to get permission from an animal care and use committee, have to get a veterinarian, right? There's all kinds of red tape. And because of that, in a lot of mammalogy classes, they don't even go out in the field anymore, just because there's just so much red tape. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to go with that. So I plan on doing that. All right. So any questions? Okay. I think the best way to learn on how to write a field journal is just to do it. So we still have about an hour left of lab time. I want to give you today some practice at writing a field journal. Now, this time of year, right on campus, there are a whole lot of mammals that you can observe other than students. There are some box squirrels that are active year-round, you can see on campus. Usually this time of the year, it's kind of difficult to go outside and sit for an hour though and watch animals. Even this morning, it's probably pretty chilly. So what I'm going to ask that you do is that you go over to the library, or if you want, you can just sit downstairs in the lounge area on the first floor and observe your fellow students. And just pretend that they're a wild animal, okay? Because humans are, we're mammals too, okay? So ordinarily a field biologist wouldn't do that, but I just want to give you some practice at learning how to take field notes and make sure you refer to this handout. Make sure you have all those basics in there, like the weather and the habitat and so on, and make some notes. So I'm going to have you do that in the next hour, in the next 50 minutes. So since I didn't give you a heads up that you're going to have to do this, I brought some field notebooks that you can use to take notes. And then when you get your field journal, you can copy them in there. I do want you to get your field journal as soon as you can, because I want you to turn in your field journal next week. And I want to see at least 30 minutes of observations of people. Okay, so you can do it down the lounge downstairs. The place I would recommend though is that you go over to the Tiger Cafe and sit and watch students in the Tiger Cafe. Okay. Now there's different ways you can make observations. One method is called ad libitum. That's where you just write down everything you see. That sort of information is difficult to analyze statistically though. So it's not really, it's useful for identifying different behaviors that you might want to study later. So it might be useful for some preliminary research, but it doesn't lend itself very well to analysis. another way of doing is called focal, let's see, I think it's called focal animal sampling. That's where you observe like one individual and you write down everything that one individual does, or everything that a herd of animals does. So you just watch that one individual. Another method is it's a type of interval sampling, where you pick an interval, like say every minute or every 5 minutes. You watch an animal and whatever that time interval is, if it's every 5 minutes, and every 5 minutes you would write down what that animal is doing at that point in time. And so by doing it at regular intervals, you can calculate the frequencies with which animals are doing certain behaviors. Okay. By writing down continuously what an animal is doing over time, you can write what's called an ethnogram. It's sort of a timeline that shows the different behaviors that an animal is doing during the course of the day. So an ethnogram is useful for determining things like, when is an animal active? What time of day? Is it just early in the morning, late at night? Is it during the middle of the day, or is it only at night? So I'm gonna go ahead and give you a little field notebook that you can take notes on. Some of them are kind of small, so I can give you two. They're small. I got more of these two. Grab some more. So your assignment for this week is going to be to make observations for at least 30 minutes, write it in your field journal. You can take notes on this, but then you're gonna have to transfer it over to your journal or itinerary. I want you to get your field journal set up. So you'll have a section for your journal, your species account, and catalog. And then I want you to turn that in during lab, at the beginning of lab next week, and I'm gonna grade that, okay? So, and that'll count towards part of your first quiz. Here's another one, now it's kind of, here's a better one. Here's another one. Here, take a couple, those are small, I think. So, those are courtesies of the place where my wife works. She brought them home and said, "Could you use any of these?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, I might be able to." So, all right, that's all I have for you for today. So I'll let you go and do some people watching. Okay. Do it discreetly though. Don't get out a pair of binoculars and stare at somebody for a half an hour. You don't want to think that you're creeping on somebody. Window. But I'm gonna want you to get a journal, something like this. Transfer that. So yeah, I would recommend that. Write the dates.
So we can just use like a
If you
conversation
don't write
book?
things down, you're gonna forget it.
That's something, I'm just gonna go buy one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, in this, you really don't.
Yeah, I know ornithology, he made us get the notebooks, and they're like $85 or something. I was like, no way, bro. They wrote like 4 things in it all year.
Yeah, I'm not ordering one of those
Yeah.
like rainbows.
I was super.
I think I would, do the point sampling where you, like every minute, write down what people are doing in every area. Yeah. I don't know if I would do one person, because they may leave.
Yeah.
And then what? You have nothing to record.
Yeah, thank you.
If we were to do one person, like, cause I was thinking of going to the library and like watching maybe like one of the workers, or
That'd be a good idea,
like
yeah.
if
Yeah.
they're gonna be there for 30
Yeah.
minutes and just
Yeah.
just seeing what they do for 30
So,
minutes.
one thing that, people do that are they're observing behaviors, is they identify common behaviors at the beginning, like talking, socializing, sleeping,
Right.
reading, and then you write down which of those behaviors they're doing like every minute.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that
yeah. Or you can just describe what they're doing every minute.
every minute.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
30 minutes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And yeah, it doesn't have to be like a big group. Like I could watch one person. It just has to be
So
30 minutes.
by
long.
doing that point sampling, that way you can take the number of occurrences of particular behavior.
Right.
And divide it by the number of observations, you get a frequency, so you could say, well, they were talking 15% of the time, they were sleeping.
And do I want to do like minute 1, minute 2?
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
describe that the whole next minute, just so like.
Or actually, just write down the time.
Okay.
Yeah, just write down the time.
Okay.
So I would write down military time, what time I got there, and then the individual, and then I'd write down minute by minute what they're doing. And then once I get to my journal, I'd write out full sentences, like during minute 1, they did this. Or should I, at that point, just say 50% of the time they're talking, 30% of the time they're doing this or that?
Well, no, you wanna just write out all your observations.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you don't wanna do any analysis.
Okay.
In your journal. Your journal, you just want, actually, your journal, you're supposed to write it out as if you were observing it right at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, no, you don't wanna do any, you can do some analysis in your journals after you have written everything down.
Okay.
I've done that before.
Okay.
I've done I've written in calculations and things, but
Alrighty.
at first you really want, by tradition, they just do a narrative. They'd say, during the first minute, I watched them do this, and in the second minute, they did this, and so on.
In the third minute. fourth
Yeah,
minute, okay.
yeah, just write it out.
So just write down the 30
Yeah.
accounts.
There's no one really single way of doing it. Different people tend to develop different styles. So I think it is okay to make up a chart and, by minute chart and then write down what they did. But you need to preface that by a description of where you made the observations, description, if you're observing people, description of the room you were in, what building on campus you were in, what was the time of the day, what was the temperature like? Is it sunny or is it cloudy? Because that could affect how many people are inside, So those kind of details, and yeah, it's your journal, so you can sort of organize it the way you want. But the important thing is you have all the essential information in there.
Yeah, like date, time, location, habitat, weather, is there anything like that?
You might even want to take a picture and you can print it off and paste it in there of what the room looked like. Or make a sketch of it. It used to be they just make a sketch because they didn't have digital cameras back then. But
Yeah.
So I have, in this journal right here, there was one field trip that I did, I don't know if I can find it right off the bat, when I was graduate school, where I drew a map, we watched birds on a pond. There's an example, there's an example of a journal entries, Yeah, but this is a journal I did for an ornithology class. So, ornithologists, herpetologists, all kinds of biologists, that's the cover ink figure. Supposed to use black ink. See, now here I did some trapping, and I had, different trap lines, so I had number, but then before that, I described, where, and here's a map of the study site, see? This is actually here in Davidson generally use a squiggle line to underline the locality. And then, scientific names, like for instance, that just use a solid,
Solid line, okay.
yeah.
Alrighty.
Yep, just look at that examples on those handouts they give you, so just follow those